Joining us on this Saturday, ravaged by months of violence, eastern Ukraine is experiencing relative calm for the meantime. The warring sides have pulled back their big guns from the front line. RT's Murad Gazdiev is there in the region following the truce. He now says returning the bodies of those killed in the conflict to their families is proving a very tough task.
Against the expectations of many, the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine is largely holding. Heavy weapons are being pulled back, and prisoners of war are being exchanged by both sides. So too are the bodies of the dead. This is one of the refrigerated vans that ferry bodies to the morgues here in Donetsk. We're actually at one of the central morgues right now. It's been busy here, what with the recent blast and the coal mine. But here also there are apparently bodies of Ukrainian government troops dating back. They've been here since the summer and autumn of last year, apparently still unclaimed by the Ukrainian government. Those bodies are starting to return to their families. This week, the remains of 50 of Kiev's troops were handed over by self-defense forces.
Мы не меняем тела. Мы давно пытаемся приучить украинскую сторону, что кощунственно менять погибших. Их надо просто передать.
And the Ukrainian government seems to be coming around.
На данный момент я получил официальное уведомление о том, кто будет действительно представлять по забору так называемых 200-х тел погибших. То есть есть официальный представитель от украинской стороны. До вчерашнего дня такого представителя на самом деле не было.
Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Scores of government troops' bodies, for example, lay at one of the civil war's focal points, the airport of Donetsk. Buried beneath the rubble for months, many corpses have begun to decompose.
И по их планам где-то в течение недели эвакуацию этих тел МЧС, если не будет дальнейших обстрелов аэропорта, завершат.
This is offering perhaps some sort of closure to families and loved ones who'll now be able to at least bury their dead. Murad Gazdiev, RT, in Donetsk, eastern Ukraine.
Down under now to where nearly 400 people from a remote Australian village face being forced from their homes because of the dust and noise coming from a rapidly expanding coal mine. Let's show you the mine here. It's owned by the giant Rio Tinto Corporation, which has rapidly expanded over the years and is now encroaching on the small town of Bulga. Authorities have supported the development of the mine. They want the locals in and around the area to be relocated. And we spoke to local activist John Cray. He told us that in Australia, the mining companies in general wield far too much power.
The miners in Australia have unfettered access to the governments and seem to be able to get almost anything they want. We, on the other hand, as a community, have virtually no access to government. They have had many secret meetings. We have been able to secure minutes of these through a freedom of information access, and clearly it is scandalous in our view. It is bordering on corruption. Now, the mine at the moment is about 5 kilometres or 6 kilometres from us, and they're proposing to come within 2.5 kilometres. So they're coming much closer. So the dust and the noise and the damage will increase for the sake of a very large international mining company who's only there for the profits. They are going to wipe out a small village of 150 houses and 400 people and simply pick it up and locate it elsewhere.
On RT.com this hour, a NASA spacecraft enters the first ever orbit of a dwarf planet. The Ceres mini-planet discovered between Mars and Jupiter more than 2 centuries ago, but only now can we start to see it up close. Also at RT.com, British politicians postpone the appearance of driverless cars on the roads because, well, they can't work out who would be to blame in the event of a car crash. Full story, RT.com. Bitcoin appeared from nowhere just a few years ago and baffled, well, most of us as to how it actually works. But then that's where Bitcoin Girl comes into play. light-hearted online platform helping people understand the potential benefits of using this digital money. RT's Lizzie Thielen in Berlin now explains how we could all soon be a bit like Bitcoin Girl, living in a Bitcoin world.
You'd be forgiven if the currency has been consigned to a distant part of your memory, along with, say, Google Glass or Windows smartphone. And while the currency's value may have nosedived in the past year or so, more and more companies are accommodating Bitcoin, from big businesses like Time Inc. and Dell, who are now working with Bitcoin processing partners like Coinbase and BitPay, to more quirky kids on the block like Bitcoin Jet or Tomcar Australia, who are now both accepting Bitcoin payments. Now, one of the biggest appeals of Bitcoin was its potential power to do away with banks as the middleman between buyer and supplier, along with a hefty fee, say, for example, when you want to send money to relatives abroad. So I've come to one of the Bitcoin's biggest global events, Inside Bitcoin, in Berlin, where some of the emerging industry's biggest movers and shakers are here to discuss what's in store for Bitcoin in 2015 and beyond. I'm here with Dmitry Borisenko from Bitcoin payment processing company CoinGate. Now, Dmitry, Bitcoin's looking less and less like a good investment. So what's the benefit for you setting up in business here just 6 months ago?
What we're trying to bring, our message is that Bitcoin is not an investment unit. It's more a convenient way to make payments. And that's what we are all about. We try to connect businesses, educate them, and tell them that, okay, it is a convenient way to make payment, it is a cheap way to make payment, and you're also moving the technology much further.
Lizzie Thielen for RT in Berlin.
And we also talked to Jeffrey Tucker from the Foundation for Economic Education. He believes the potential of digital currencies is enormous.
Well, Bitcoin has absolutely become more mainstream. When I first got interested in it in February of 2013, very few people even seemed to know about it. It's good to remember that 5 years ago, nobody would have imagined something like a digital currency could ever achieve dollar parity, much less be sustainable above $200 to the Bitcoin. 2014 was a great year for building Bitcoin infrastructure. We have new tools we didn't even have in 2013. And that's what's happening. I think we're going to see them all come online in 2016, especially. It's so much better than nationalized currencies. It's not even funny. It's a much superior system. Governments keep trying to regulate it. There is no stopping Bitcoin. It has been invented. It belongs to humanity now. And I think it's as important as the internet itself.
Hollywood rarely looks further than a good stereotype when it needs a villain. And more often than not, Russians take on the role. So RT's Alexei Rashevsky took a deeper look at how Russians are represented across, well, the Western media.
The greatest threat the United States now faces is the Soviet Union.
They are Russian, they are spies, they harm America. But you'll find it hard to dislike them, because they are the Americans. Writers of the show, one of whom is a former CIA agent, set up this timeline wall in their office for inspiration.
It just brings you back.
They say their plan was not about making just another spy drama.
It's about family, it's about marriage, it's about trust, it's about identity. It's about these things for individuals, but the goal is to see all of it for its truth, not for some simple mustache-twirling bad guy on one side and some other side with a halo over its head.
It was always sort of silly. After the Cold War, it became ridiculous that the Russians continued to appear in all these American films, and they were always the bad guys, and we weren't even in a Cold War anymore. On a human level, it was sort of a ridiculous thing to do. Why not portray real people when you can?
This humanization has proved to be a breath of fresh air, propelling the show into a major hit. It takes place at the dusk of Cold War, which makes sense for its plot. However, the latest addition to TV series focused on Russian spies is staged, surprisingly, in our days.
We know you believe the Cold War never ended, hunkering and waiting.
Well, if that message wasn't clear enough, the very opening episode of NBC's brand new show, The Allegiance, sends a far more graphic one.
Изменилось, но законы организации остались те же.
Apparently, you don't want to mess with the Russians because they would burn their enemies alive. That is, of course, fiction. But here's what happens in the real world.
So it seemed to me already that there was a strong connection between MH370 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
From suggestions that Russians hijacked a missing Malaysian plane to a Russian expatriate writer who locked himself in a hotel room and watched a week of Russian state TV non-stop to conclude that Russians enjoy suffering, to this incredible Putin has Asperger's syndrome story picked up by just about every US network recently. The study, supposedly conducted by a Pentagon think tank, raised eyebrows even among some of staunch Russia's critics.
Even people who have been banging the drum for conflict with Russia immediately took to the airwaves and to the op-ed pages to say that this is utterly ridiculous.
But former ABC and CNN producer Danny Schechter was not surprised at all.
If it wasn't Asperger's, it would be something else. American people trust their media totally. They think, their media has been telling them the truth. Certainly they can't speak Russian, certainly don't know much about what's happened in Russia because there's no background reporting, there's no context, there's no background. As a result, they're willing to believe the worst.
TV series in America give a weapon of choice to opt for the likable spies or the ones burning people in furnaces, or even catch a glimpse of Russia's controversial punk rock band starring in a box office hit show. Ratings are usually indicative of what the eventual choices of viewers are, which puts smiles on the faces of those who created the Americans.
We asked ourselves many, many times, will people root for KGB spies undercover working to harm America in certain ways? And interestingly enough, the answer to that immediately proved to be yes. That wasn't a problem at all.
But when it comes to how Russians have been viewed by the news media lately, such variety is nowhere to be seen. Well, at least in the case of TV series, you would know for sure that you are watching fiction. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, reporting from New York City.